Hello and welcome to this video, which is going to be discussing healing races in ESO, and I've made this tier list to make that job a little easier. So why is Breton considered the best healing race in ESO? Well, the Breton's got a lot of sustain, mainly through its passive that gives us 7% cost reduction. It's got a little bit of Magicka recovery as well to that passive, and it's got max Magicka, which is nice. We're using Magicka as our main resource. And then it's got a passive I actually consider pretty important. So first of all, I would prioritize sustain as a healer, because we want as many high APM as possible to get as many ticks as possible, because our main healing is through having many ticks, not as much potent ticks. Plus sustain helps us do more pulse of and low free. But our second priority should be survivability. Why do I think survivability is very important on a healer? Well, healers often are in exposed roles, mainly through something like a kite roll. You can think of a lot of situations with kite rolls, and there's often also situations where we would have taunt or an ad or two, or even a mini boss for that matter, which makes us a lot more exposed than for example the DDs in our group. So for that reason, I think survivability is very important on a healer, and the Breton's got one of the best survivability passives in the game through its spell resistance. It's got 2300 spell resistance. If we have around 21,000 armor, that translates to about 5% damage mitigation. If it's procced, it's doubled, and it's about 10% damage mitigation, and that's a very, very nice passive. It's a lot of damage mitigation and can help us survive a lot of situations we wouldn't have survived otherwise. Of course, how you proc the passive is if you have one of the status effects. And you will often proc this passive. It's going to be up a lot of the time if you're taking elemental damage. Second is our A tier. In the A tier, I put Nord as the second best race. Why is Nord the second best race? Well, the Nord has got two passives that are interesting for us. It's got max HP. Max HP is not useless on a healer. We can often change our build in ways to either turn that into Magicka, but it also just allows us to have more food choices, more attribute choices. So there are definitely ways we can use its max HP in very useful ways. But it's got two other passives. It's got around 2300 armor. Armor, of course, different from spell resistances, is also mitigates physical damage, so all types of damage except Oblivion. And that armor translates to about 5.5% damage reduction. Not as much as the Breton, but it's all types of damage, and that's very, very nice. The other passive that's very useful on the Nord is, of course, the ultimate regen. Now, this ultimate regen is going to proc once every 10 seconds, which is very helpful to a healer. People often think that only a tank can proc this passive. It's very, very easy to proc as well on a healer. There are fights where it's going to not have as good returns, but overall it's going to return you about 20 ult every 45 seconds. Why is the 45 seconds important? Well, that's the cooldown of the set Pillager's Prophet. 20 ult, it's about 5% of the threshold you want to hit with Pillager's Prophet, which is 400 ultimate. But to give some context here, it's 0.5 ult per second, which it is the same as wearing 3 potion cooldown glyphs on a Nightblade. So just to give some context, a race passive that is just as powerful as 3 infused glyphs on your jewelry, and that I think makes it worth it to pick not just for that. Now, this is very niche and mostly something that a very optimized group would take advantage of, but it certainly makes the Nord the second best race for healing, and something to be considered race changing for exclusively, just as alt regen passive. Then third, I put the Dunmer. Why did I put the Dunmer above the Oldmer, which is in the B tier? Well, the Dunmer has got the same spell damage. It's got roughly the same Magicka. The difference is that the Dunmer has got maximum resources, whereas the Oldmer has got sustain on the off resource. So Oldmer's got a passive that mostly gives stamina back, and the Dunmer has got maximum resources instead. I would say having maximum resources on your off resource is better than sustain, because especially with stamina, you tend to stack it up to 100% and then you use it all rapidly. And having more maximum resources makes you able to cast more skills, do one extra wall dodge, block for a second longer whenever you want to use your stamina, whereas the stamina regen requires you to consistently use that resource to really take advantage of it. And for that reason, I think the maximum resource is better. The other reasons the Dunmer is the third best tier, and that's like a tier above the Ulmer, is of course the passive that gives us fire resistance. The fire resistance on the Dunmer translates to roughly 10% damage mitigation. Again, assuming 21,000 armor. That's a lot. And fire damage is the most common type of damage in ESO, so it's present in all trials. It is more present in older content like Asylum and Halls of Fabrication. And the new trials, there is fire damage, but it isn't really deadly damage. It's not damage where you would say, wow, that 10% damage mitigation really helped me. But it is present everywhere, and you're going to take less damage than an Ulmer in all content playing at Ulmer. Then of course there's the Ulmer. Ulmer's got roughly, again, the same as the Dunmer. What it has got is 5% damage mitigation when you're using a challenge ability. A challenge ability is your beam, and your beam like either on the temper or that canister. So if you're playing either of those two roles and you're beaming a lot, then consider the Ulmer. Mostly you would consider it playing it at DD. And then we move all the way down to the C tier. There is two races here. There's the Khajiit. The Khajiit has got a little bit of max HP, which is nice. It's got a little bit of magic, a little bit of stamina, and then it's of course got what I would consider the most useless passive in the game, which is where it is for healing, which is maximum critical, like a critical healing modifier. Why is a critical healing modifier useless? Well, I just did a video on why critical healing is not very good, which it is not. But critical healing modifier, basically, critical healing is overhealing. Increasing that overhealing is just going to be even more overhealing, which is nothing. So if you're going to heal someone to 120%, healing them to 130% makes no difference. The Khajiit, however, is C tier because of what it is as an off DD. So often if you're doing a bit harder content, you'll be doing some off DDing as one of the healers, because most content can be done with just one healer. A really good example of this is front kiting in Asylum, which will typically be done in Sense and Martial Knowledge. What is special about these two sets is that they're both light armor. You're forced to wear at least 5 pieces of light armor. And when you're in that role, having the Khajiit passive for the damage, which is very, very nice, because it'll break your critical damage modifier up higher, and you'll be doing more damage as a Khajiit than you would as an Ulmer Dunmer. So for that reason, the Khajiit is C tier. Then you have the Argonian, one of the oldest, more popular healing races among older players. The Argonian has got the potion passive, which is not very good. It's got a bit of max HP, it's got a bit of max stamina, a bit of max magicka, and then it's got the, I think it's 6% healing done. Now, 6% healing done is not a lot. It's basically like a jack of all trades, master of none. Like, it's got the little bit of survivability, and it's got a little bit of sustain, it's got a little bit of healing potency. But none of the passages really add up to being better than any of the races above. And for that reason, the Argonian is C tier. It's not useless, but it's not particularly good at anything, really. And for that reason, it's C tier. And then you've got the RP races, and Imperial is the first. Why is the Imperial the best of the RP races? Well, the Imperial's got 6% cost reduction on everything, including the ultimate. Ultimate cost reduction, not really good in a healer using, for example, Pillager's Prophet. Red Guard is number 2. Red Guard has also got cost reduction, but only on your weapon skills. You have a lot of weapon skills as a healer, but still not worth picking this race. The Orc has got the movement speed. You can pretty much just wear one piece of swift jewelry and you will be able to catch up, so really no point playing an Orc. And then there's the Bosmer, which has got nothing that really helps us as a healer. And that pretty much wraps up the tier list and the reason why every race is placed as they are. An important thing I want to point out is that if you're playing as a tank main, or if you're DD main considering healing, as long as you pick a Dunmer for your DDs and you pick a Nord for your tanks, then you can swap those characters to be healers and still be an A or A tier healer. So that's very, very nice. Same goes for a healer player that wants to make DDs. As long as you make them Dunmer, if you one day want to go and heal on those races, well, you can do that. Also want to point out that the threshold really for playing veteran content is just above the RP tier. As long as you're playing anything that's C, B, or A or S tier, you're pretty much good for for veteran content. I would say the threshold for veteran hard mode content is above the C tier. So as long as you're playing any of those races above the C tier, you're pretty much good for veteran hard mode content. If you want to go for no death content, so trifectas, I would suggest getting an A or S tier race, just because they have the damage mitigation, which is going to prevent you from dying, which is one more run that's a chance to be a trifecta. And if you're playing for score runs, it's the same. I would probably always go for a present for score runs, unless I'm using a Nord for the alt region passive. And that pretty much wraps up your tier list. Remember, the most important is that you're comfortable with your race choice, whether that be an RP choice or a choice because your character is also your PvP character, a choice because your character is also your DPS character, or whatever. That is what matters the most, not so much what is most optimized. As sort of for a comparison, I think a healer race is a little more important than a DD race choice, but I also think it's a lot less important than, for example, tanking, where Nord really makes or breaks your build, and there is certainly a big difference between playing a Nord or Imperial tank when it comes to some of the harder content. It's not as much the same for a healer. There's been done trifectas, that's been done world records on all of the races, so it doesn't really make that much of a difference in that regard. And that was pretty much it. Thank you for watching.